Let's be real, Checo's time at Red Bull will come to a close soon. Yes, he has the sponsorship backing, but these performances are getting really bad. And he would probably be okay if he was finishing at lowest P10, but he is somehow struggling to do that. And before anyone wants to say that he is being compromised by Red Bull, we first have to ask ourselves, is Red Bull the one getting out of Q1, or is it Checo getting out of Q1? And even if he was being compromised by Red Bull, it's not like his driving is making up for it, since his driving and race ability is just declining with each passing year. And considering how this season is going, Red Bull desperately need two drivers getting big points to stay as the leading team. So let's be real again. Checo will most likely get dropped after this year despite the contract announcement. So now there's only one question left to ask: who is going to, or rather, who should replace Sergio Perez at Red Bull? Now, we have a plethora of candidates to choose from. However, there are three drivers who, in my opinion, are the most likely due to them being a part of Red Bull's driver academy. Obviously, F2 and especially F3 drivers will be excluded because they're too young and inexperienced, and in the case of Iwasawa, I don't think he's going to be in contention due to the lack of F1 experience, but still a very class driver. So without further ado, let's talk about our first candidate. Let's start with the one and only honey badger, and that is, of course, Daniel Ricciardo. And this is probably the easiest or hardest decision depending on the person you ask. And for me, it's the hardest decision since there are valid arguments from both sides. And man, if I'm being honest, part of me wants this to happen, but another part of me doesn't. Let me explain. The start of the season was absolute garbage for Danny Rick. However, after China, something snapped inside of him, and in Miami, he qualified and finished P4, even fighting for P3 momentarily in the sprints, and that was all in a V-carb. Let's not talk about the actual race though. And since that performance, he's been cooking and looked like the young Danny Rick we all fell in love with. But see, that's the problem. I said young Danny Rick. Daniel is not young anymore. He is 35 and going to be 36 next year. And sure, Lewis is going to be 40 and Fernando is going to be 43 and they're still cooking. Why can't Danny? Well, he is not Lewis Hamilton or Fernando Alonso. And before you say, what about Hulkenberg? He's going to be 37 next year. Well, he is in a Haas, and driving down there is not the same as fighting for the front and getting anything above P5 consistently. My point is, he will not be long term, and you also have to consider the significantly younger talent, since I imagine they won't take too kindly to see a 36-year-old man get a top seat over them and potentially let their talent die out. Now, while it may seem like I am just ripping Daniel apart for something completely out of his control, there are still other criticisms that aren't age related, such as his inconsistency. Remember when I said he cooked in Miami? Well, he still had mediocre performances such as in Imola, Monaco, and Spain. And it's weird because one week he looks so fast, then another, he's as stiff as a stone. And with Red Bull being in title fights, they need someone who can always be at the front consistently and pick up the pieces if things go wrong for Max. So from the way I currently see things, Danny Rick would be a good option, but only for short term, meaning 1 or 2 years, and would be very likely to get the Bottas and Checo treatment because of it. So, having said that, let us now move on to our second candidate. Now for the chef, Yuki Tsunoda, who is of course Danny Rick's teammate. Unlike Daniel, Yuki has been cooking all season long with very few bad performances here and there, and this has gained him a lot of deserved praise. If you recall back to 2021, people were already calling for Yuki to be kicked out, and 2022 did not help his cause at all. But in 2023, he shut everyone up, and now in 2024, he's doing victory laps around his critics, and this proves that you give a talented driver time to settle in, they can extract that talent that everyone knows they have. makes you wonder if the same sentiment can apply to drivers like Logan Sargent, since he does perform here and there, but not consistently enough, so who knows, maybe time can serve him well. Same with Mick. Anyways, back to Yuki. He has been rapid, and not only rapid, but amazing wheel to wheel, and top that with consistency. These are the marks of an amazing driver. I think it's been long enough in the season for us to say that this isn't some temporary form. This is class, and I think many of us will be angry if Yuki never even gets a chance with Red Bull or a top seat in general. Now, he is not perfect. He does have his issues, just like all of us, and his issue is a big ol' potty mouth and a hot head. Now yes, it is funny when the little man swears on the radio, but talking real though, it's not good for him, since this can affect his driving and make him more mad and in turn more stupid. As Master Yoda once said, fear leads to anger, anger leads to hate, hate leads to suffering, and if Yuki doesn't cool his head down, he will suffer in the midfield or back markers for the rest of his time in Formula 1. Now admittedly, he has gotten better since he said that moving to Italy plus therapy has helped him, but he does have his moments here and there, such as in Austria where that was a really big no-no, but we all have imperfections, and at least he is clearly putting in the effort and initiative to move away from anger and enter peace and cooking. So as long as Yuki keeps his anger controlled and his temperament in check, Yuki to Red Bull could be very likely due to his young age and fast speed. But unfortunately, Christian Horny doesn't think the same, since every time he is asked about Yuki's performances, he always says something like, "Oh, it's too early to tell," which, fair enough, but at least one compliment would be nice to him. Also, not to mention, Yuki did sign a contract extending his place at VCarb, but I see zero reason as to why it can be broken in favor of putting him at Red Bull. So, having said all of this about Yuki, let us now move into our last realistic candidate. Now, for the biggest Cars fan, Liam Lawson. And I know what you might say, what makes you think he will get a direct call up to Red Bull even though he doesn't have a full-time seat? Well, let me explain. First off, the elephant in the room. Liam drove 5 races in 2023 and was impressive to say the least, since he did match Yuki's pace and looked like he was driving for a long time in those races, and there were even calls for him to replace Ricciardo for the remainder of the season, since Liam did replace him momentarily while Danny recovered from injury. And not only that, but Liam has been traveling with the Red Bull camp for the majority of this season, since he is their third driver, which means he most likely knows and has a good relationship with most of the team. This would make transitioning into either VCarb or Red Bull seamless for him, and he probably wouldn't struggle with any sort of discomfort. So, since Red Bull have this luxury, you know what I say? Why not put him next to Max? And while yes, he may need more testing with Red Bull, I still think it's worth the gamble, and I seriously don't think Liam would struggle getting results. Would he struggle against Max? That's a different discussion, but in terms of being there in case Max is not, I don't think that will be an issue for Liam. Now obviously, the biggest problem with this is inexperience, since 5 races is one thing and 24 races is another, and as we see with Checo, he performs for the first several races, but after about 6 or 7, he leaves until the final 5-ish races, so who's to say the same can't happen to Liam out of the 3 drivers? However, I do think this is the greater issue of the 3 drivers, so perhaps this is the most unrealistic of the realistic options. So, having said that, let us move on to other candidates outside of the Red Bull pool that are semi-realistic. Also, it was just announced that Liam is doing a filming day with Red Bull at Silverstone after a poor performance by a Red Bull driver. Sounds familiar. Anyways. The first of these semi-realistic candidates is obviously Carlos Sainz, and this may have more merit than you think, since Carlos is an ex-Red Bull Academy member, and as we saw with Albon and Kvyat, Red Bull aren't opposed to getting past Red Bull members back into the Red Bull family. And Sainz is a top driver, so if Red Bull bring him back to the team, they can be sure they won't have inconsistency from him. But there is a problem, and that is Sainz himself. I am so sure at this point that Sainz is just playing a long game of chicken with the teams, and I fear he will not only let a Red Bull drive slip from his hands, but a drive for F1 in general while he continues to wait for the best offer. Also, not to mention, Checo technically has a seat in place, so if he was to be replaced, I doubt Red Bull will look outside their pool, but who knows, maybe they'll acquire Sainz, ironically like how they acquired Checo for 2021. Next, for our semi-realistic options, is Lando Norris, and I should more aptly dub this as a 1 in 16th realistic option, because there is no way he goes to Red Bull for next year, but I thought to mention it, because I am going to play Lando's favorite game, the if game. If Lando is continuously going to get screwed over by McLaren's strategy, who's to say he won't stick the finger to Snack Brown and leave? He is friends with Max, at least I think they still are, so driver relationship would be good, unless it's Mercedes again. But enough of the if game. My verdict on Lando to Red Bull is a no way Jose, but I thought to include it here anyway since it was a big rumor last year. Now for Esteban Ocon and Zhou Guanyu. Trust me guys, it's gonna happen. I'm going to cut the bullshit. I think Ricciardo will get the drive, not because he is the best, or the fastest, or the most consistent, or the most ideal, but because he is the most stable option for Christian Horner. In my opinion, Yuki is the best option and should get the seat over Daniel, but who's to say that it's not going to blow up in their face, just like with Gasly in the first half of 2019? Even though I don't think so. And Liam is simply too risky to put at Red Bull right now, since there is a high chance he performs, but an equally high chance he fails, and maybe if Red Bull were back in that weird 2017 into 2020 era, they would put him at the team, but since they're actually fighting for titles here, I don't think they would risk that as of now, and they'll most likely put him at V-Carb. Ideally for Red Bull, or maybe just horndog, I think they will drop Checo, put Ricciardo in for 1 or 2 years, and during that time, let Yuki and Liam duel at V-Carb to see who will be their next long-term driver. And there is who I think should replace Checo at Red Bull for 2025. Man, I'm sad. I want to go back to the days of being a Checo fan where we celebrated P7s and partied like hell over podiums, but these days as a Checo fan are rough. But we gotta be real here, perhaps he has reached his limit and maybe his days as a family guy are fast approaching and racing will soon be behind him if it isn't already. I think Red Bull can breathe easy knowing they have talent to fill the seat, and I sincerely think my prediction I said a couple seconds ago will come true, even if it's not my ideal lineup. Anyways, if you enjoyed today's video, make sure to leave a like and subscribe since that would greatly help me in delivering better content, and let me know in the comments who you think should replace Checo at Red Bull, and as always, have an amazing day.
Good weather for the duck.